So today we're going to be talking about financing domestic retrofit, going into a couple of different case studies and looking at some different areas of financing retrofit. So when I started doing this research, I realised that there are two quite big different areas with financing retrofit. So there's the kind of finance mechanism for the householder perspective. So what does it look like for the person who's going to be receiving the finance? How is that made easy for them to engage with? And there's also the kind of financial sources. So where does the money come from to begin with? And there's a variety of public, citizen or private different kinds of spaces where you could gain finance from. So I've decided for this session, we're going to focus on the mechanisms for householder perspective. The reason for that is because I think by focusing on that aspect, you're still going to get to see case studies and different examples of how those have been financed, but with a bit more of the focus on the kind of thing that we've been doing within our group already in looking at the householder perspective. So I hope that is okay with everybody. I did find one really useful resource for more of the financial sources side of things, which came from the Covenant of Mayors, and you can have a look at that down at the bottom after this session. So the key areas that we're going to look at today is grants for householders, different lending mechanisms that different municipalities have used across the world. I haven't just constrained myself to Europe for this one. Looking at energy bill obligations, so how energy companies have been used to finance retrofit. And then finally, some of the taxation and regulation aspects as well. The core questions that I'm going to look at for each one are the context, what's the financial mechanism, what's the householder experience, what's the local authority's role within that and any partners, and then finally the impact. Because it's because some of the programs are fairly new, the information can be a little bit patchy, so particularly when it comes to the impact assessment side of things, but I've included what I can. What I should say is that I'm definitely no expert in this area. It's more of a kind of literature review of what's going on out there already, as well as case studies and examples that I've learned about from speaking to other municipalities who are also involved with the mPOWER. One thing to bear in mind as we go through this is we've got lots of different potential householder variables that you might want to bear in mind as we go through these different case studies and think about which ones would work for people who are in different housing types and which ones would work for people of different demographics as well. So to start with, I said that we'd begin with the grant scheme experiences. And when I started looking into this, I kind of realised that you guys have got quite a lot of experiences of working with different funders to bring in large sums of money, which are then given to householders in order to support them in doing retrofit. So as our kind of introductory round, I thought it would be nice if we could share our different experiences of delivering grant schemes for domestic retrofit within our cities, and what are the opportunities and challenges of taking this kind of approach. So I'll just give you a second to have a think about that. But yeah, when I was going through it, I felt that you guys were more the experts in this area, and so it would be good to start with a bit more of a conversation between us.
Well, Laura, I have to say that mainly what is given from these municipalities is subsidies. We don't use the grants. So
what is the difference between grants and subsidies? No.
I would say
subsidies. Any difference between grants and subsidies, or what's?
Yeah, I would include subsidies within grants. So a subsidy is a small grant provided as opposed to, I guess you're thinking, John, a grant of a full amount for a full domestic retrofit, which is more like what we've heard about from Elena before.
Okay, I get the difference. So yes, it's not our department, but the municipality gives subsidies to householders for retrofitting, and there are also some some money coming from the regional state too. And there's some money that you can get if you comply with the requirements, with the income requirements that the regional authority puts for as maximum incomes to get the subsidy. And sometimes even if you have a high income, you can get some money taken out from your what we call the income declaration, the taxes.
Yeah.
So the majority of your grant or subsidy funding has come from national or regional government as opposed to EU funded projects. Is that right?
Sorry, could you repeat?
So the majority of your funding for grants and subsidies has come from the national or regional government as opposed to the EU.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't got big funding from there.
Yeah. Nowadays, yes, the householders receive the more grant from regional or national government, because in San Sebastian they changed the ordinance that regulates the grant giving or something like that, and nowadays they gave more importance to accessibility in the houses, elevators and things like that, and energy efficiency is not so important in those subsidies. So yes, they receive maybe some money, but it's not so much. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a challenge of national or regionally funded grant schemes, isn't it? That it can disappear according to the politics, and yeah, whether it's being funded at that particular time. Great. Anyone else want to share something on experiences with grant subsidies?
Usually what you can get as a householder from the European Union comes through the regional subsidies.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the European Union programs, general programs that are applied for the region, and then given by the regional authority to householders. So sometimes EU funding comes indirectly from the regional government.
Mm.
And apart from that, besides that, sometimes, but very few times, like for instance, we have a Horizon 2020 project where EU has funded some of the retrofitting of a block of householders that were into the project.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really usual. That's only for a specific programs, projects that we have in cooperation with EU.
Yeah. So kind of quite smaller projects, particular things for getting new projects going, perhaps, as a use for EU funding. Has anyone else got something to contribute?
Also, as we are members of the European Union, the most of our funding is European grants by operational programs, and also national grants. For example, is the program for renovation of buildings at the moment, residential buildings. This is national grant. Okay.
And what have you found to be the opportunities and challenges of both kinds of funding streams?
Opportunities is that we have to implement our investment program, which all municipality developed several years ago, and we have to apply for this money and to implement all this project for the pavement, for streets, for schools, for street lighting and everything, all infrastructure of the city. And this is also, except opportunity is challenge also. So we renovate the city as a whole. And now this program for residential buildings is just like additional improvement of the vision of the city.
Okay. Cool. Thank you, Elena.
The other problem, but we except challenge, we have a lack of people, of experts, of workers also, of implementers. So this is the main problem here now in Bulgaria at all. Okay.
Thanks. Justin? Justin, are you still there? I know you were starting to speak before. Or if not, maybe Boyan has something to share.
Yeah, we don't have any experience in providing grants or subsidies for our citizens to improve energy efficiency of their buildings. But we are working on that, and that's something that I repeated many times. We are going to prepare our energy efficiency program for residential buildings in the next half year top, and we expect that that program should offer some amount of subsidies there. I have learned about some experiences across Serbia. Užice is the most fresh one, and but I think that I know some experiences from Serbia, but we in Niš are expecting to use also that experience on then lessons learned from our mPOWER group, learning group, and also what we can use from our consultants from World Bank and others to have the best product for us.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I was just trying to deal with a really bad sound that was coming from my computer. Well, at the moment, can you all just see the presentation, or can you see my whole screen?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
You can just see the presentation?
There's a presentation.
I can see a slide list down the side and a kind of thing on the right hand side. It says slide layout and blank slide.
Yes. Okay, cool. So I think that's fine.
Before it was fine.
Yeah.
I should say I keep dropping out and then dropping back in again. So I'm missing a fair bit, and I may, if I start talking at any point, just drop away and disappear for a while. I've got it down to a T of how I can connect back as quickly as possible, but it's a bit annoying.
Sure. So Justin, do you want to share your experience of grant schemes and funders?
Yes. So most of the grant schemes I've worked with are national level funding, and in the UK our national funding for retrofit comes from energy companies. So rather than the government taxing people and using that to make money available for insulation and heating improvements, instead they require any companies selling electricity and gas to householders to add a kind of extra fee onto the bill, and that money gets then reinvested by those energy companies in making homes more efficient. It's not a very good system, I don't think, and what it leads to is a system where energy suppliers are trying to then deliver that for the cheapest possible price that they can, and I think that's where they thought it was useful, because energy suppliers are big companies who know how to do things for the cheapest possible price, because that's how they become kind of big companies, and so it's better for them to do it than the government to do it. What we find is the big challenges that it makes available is how you make sure that there's enough funding there to do what needs to be done with households that are either complicated to insulate or complicated to improve the heating in. or how you can make sure that there's enough funding in there to be able to fund the support that a household needs. So if a householder is very vulnerable and is going to need a lot of support to understand what's happening, then it doesn't really fund that. And the other thing it used to fund many years ago is you could have an organisation like Plymouth Energy Community acting as a delivery agent. So we'd get that funding from energy suppliers, and then we would work with different installers, and we could match the best installer to different jobs, and we could see how installers do, and if some of them are performing badly, we could stop working with them, but we'd be in control and we'd be able to offer the advice and the guidance to the householder. But nowadays with that funding, it's so minimal that often it's just, there's not enough money for anybody to play that role.
Oh, I think we just lost Justin there. Okay. So I'm glad that I went for that approach for this first section, as I think what I've learned from working with you guys so far is that you're the specialists, particularly in national funding spaces. I did have a quick look at some of the European Union level funding opportunities. I don't think there's going to be anything that's surprising for any of you here. So you've got ELENA funding, which is for financing costs related to energy assessments and also developing new financial instruments. And then there's ERDF funding for more innovative projects around the low carbon economy, both of which have had various retrofit grant schemes funded through them. So I won't go into any more detail with that, but it's an option for us to look a little bit more into grant schemes and how they could work if we wanted to. So today is about just combining our knowledge and seeing where there are holes. My feeling at the moment is that we have quite a lot of understanding about grant schemes, both at European and national level context, but we can have a discussion about that at the end as to whether that's where we'd want to spend a bit more of our time on looking in more detail at domestic retrofit financing and who we might want to bring in as an expert witness. So that's all I'm going to say about grants for now. So on to the lending side of things. So this is going to be the biggest part of this presentation, where I found quite a lot of interesting case studies that look at different ways in which pots of money have been lent to householders of all sorts of different demographics and household types in order to encourage retrofit. And I think in going through this as well, you can pick up some of the mechanisms that you would include as well if you were going to do funding for a grant scheme as well. So yeah, so those are things to look out for as we go through this space. Okay, so lending case studies. The first one that I found, which I thought was really interesting, is the KfW. So KfW is a bank that is state-owned in Germany. It came out of the Marshall Plan in the 60s, I think, when they wanted to find ways of investing in infrastructure within Germany. And since the late 80s, it's began investing into domestic retrofit as well. So how they do this, sorry, I just need to stop that from going off. There we go. Okay, so in Germany, across all of the different regions, they have a performance-based investment subsidy, which is integrated and available through all of their banks, but it's a national bank level which provides the finance to begin with. So they have different loans with different interest rates according to your income bracket. And it's supplemented by a grant depending on what kind of building standard you want to push your energy efficiency retrofit through. So it really encourages a whole house approach where you can get up to 100,000 euros per unit, and you're incentivized to do the deepest kind of energy efficiency retrofit that is possible. They have integrated into the finance mechanism with this, and a requirement for being able to access the finance, is that you gain expert advice on both the planning and the installation from a registered expert from a national database that they have been developing. And it's a mandatory requirement in order to be able to access the finance. And they require that energy efficiency, being the more difficult kind of action that you would do on a household, to be done before you would go on to renewable energy. So save energy first, and then think about the green energy that you create through renewables afterwards. And this is a very kind of like national approach, where the Federal Ministry of Transport, Building and Urban Development sets the agenda for this, and then it's handed over to the KfW to manage on their behalf. On their behalf. And there's lots of different measures that are included within that, from boiler replacements, new windows, through to roof insulation. And you can read about more of the specifics of those on their website. So the way it works from a householder perspective is that you apply through your main bank. So it's been set up so it crosses through all of the banks across Germany. So you're not having to change bank or find a different provider when you go through a retrofit process. And you submit an application to the bank. And at this point, this is triggered and forwarded onto KfW, who then decide whether they're going to refinance the loan at whichever rate they're going to. And then that comes back to the loan at your main bank, who will then redistribute the loan and finance that for you on regular payments. Within this, you can see, so here you've got the different levels of finance which are available. So I was saying before that it's a tiered program, whereby the higher the level of energy efficiency that you have, the more grant or loan that you have available. So here, single measures down at the bottom, you can see that you get the lowest amount of loan scheme available, and grant scheme eligibility of around 10%, going all the way up to the KfW Energy Efficiency House 55 up at the top, where you can get up to 27.5% loan scheme and up to 30% of the grant. So it's all tiered, and it really incentivizes people to think about what's the biggest energy efficiency works that they could do within their home. To make sure that the level of energy efficiency is really, really kept in, so there's a kind of quality assurance element which is built into their financing mechanism. This is where the energy experts come in to do the monitoring and the assessment of the initial works and the planning, and they're there all the way through the project to make sure that the level of works done really meets what they said it will do to begin with. And that's how you get the grant mechanism triggered each time. So the impact of this project has been over 4 million units have been either built or refurbished. So this is both used for new builds and refurbishing older properties. It's issued close to around 100 billion in loans or grants to builders, triggered huge investments in the building economy, and ended up with a lot of jobs being stimulated through that process as well. So 320,000 jobs per year, they estimate. So one of the challenges with this approach is that the householder takes quite a lot of the risk in terms of what's the energy performance of the house. So if you go through the process and you've got the energy expert who does the planning, there's some kind of process to be sure of how much energy will be saved through the end works. But once you go into actually living in the house, that might change, and that might change the kind of sums in savings that the householder will create, which would therefore have an impact on the kind of the financial terms of the loan that they've taken out as well. So it's a very kind of big state-run approach to retrofit financing, but I thought it was quite interesting because of that link between the level of retrofit and the finance, and how they monitor some of the quality aspects within it. Has anyone got any questions on that one? We can take it by case study if that's useful.
No, it's okay for me.
Okay. So the second one, which I just thought I would bring our attention back to, is the Energy Sprung model. I know that we had Energy Sprung UK present when we were in Plymouth, but I thought it would be, it's another interesting way of thinking about financing that they've developed in the Netherlands. So this is a Netherlands, again, national government program that was initially developed, but has more recently become a private company doing retrofit works. And it works off a pay-as-you-save mechanism, originally established for housing associations and later widened to include non-residential buildings as well. And what's different to this one than the original one is that there are a kind of set of standards that the organisation that does the building works and the planning has to meet in order for them to be classified as an energy sprung household. So they require that the building will deliver net zero energy over the course of a year. It will be delivered in 1 week. There'll be a 30-year minimum performance guarantee, both on the energy measures and internal comfort levels, attractiveness and comfortable requirements, and cost effectiveness for surviving under the financing scheme. So what this does include is a kind of very whole house retrofit. So not only energy efficiency measures, but it also includes solar within the building setup. So it really takes the whole building as an approach and looks at how much it would cost to finance that. And the liability for the works then sits with the contractor. So they're responsible for an energy performance contract, which says how much savings will be created through this. So it's slightly different to the KfW one in terms of where the liability sits. This model works from the householder perspective. So these are usually managed through housing associations when they began, who would come and develop a program alongside the householders, where previously you would have had the housing association receiving rent from the individual, and you would have the energy bill being paid directly to the energy company. After the refurbishment is done by Energy Sprung, it changes things a little bit so that from the householder perspective, you're now paying back to the housing association for your rent, but also to the it changes things so that you're paying a small amount of money towards the building plans for retrofit and all the works that have been done to the property. So there's a kind of energy plan which splits between some money going to the electricity utility and some money going to the housing association in order to pay for the works that has been done. The impact of this one, around 1,000 homes a year have been built or retrofitted using this model. They have savings of about 45% in 1,000 new homes and 800 existing houses. And again, similar benefits to the others in stimulating the local economy, jobs, all of that kind of stuff. So one of the challenges with this one that I found is that some of the billing can be a little bit complicated. If it's not one bill that you're now being charged for your energy, that could be a little bit complex from a householder perspective. In terms of the finances stacking up, the way that it works in the Netherlands is that the meter can go backwards. So instead of because it includes the renewables aspect within the energy sprung model, it means that the export, so in the UK anyway for us, the export guarantee is a smaller amount than the amount that you would be paid for using a unit of energy. Whereas in the Netherlands, it's equal between the two different aspects. So it means that the financial case for the whole model stacks up in quite a different way. So this is something to bear in mind if you're developing a kind of a full household retrofit model, in how those different charges for 1 kilowatt of energy are distributed. Finally, there was some talk about it being quite complicated from the citizen perspective in terms of what's the required behaviour within the house. So if there's been a lot of modelling done to look at how the house will perform in certain conditions, there will be judgments made about how a person will live within that house. And there have been contracts drawn up through Energy Sprung which state the amount of times that you will use the shower and those kinds of mechanisms included into it, which can be a little bit overfacing and a bit complicated. So whether there are ways of improving this so it's a bit more trust-based was brought up in a couple of literature reviews that I had. Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah, Lara, but the works, how are paid? So could you repeat, please? All the works are paid by the states in the bill, or the householder pay an amount, or how it works exactly?
Yeah, so the housing association is the one, hang on, so Energy Sprung puts up the money originally with the housing association. The tenant pays back to that fund through a slight change in their energy billing. So instead of the money going to a larger amount going to the energy company, a small amount of that money goes back to the, I think it's the housing association. It might be Energy Sprung, I'm not sure. But one of those two organisations holds the loan pot, and then it gets recycled back in.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I think my understanding of is, so if you're a housing association, because the one bit missing from this is maintenance funds. So if you're a housing association and you've got 100 homes, all of which you're going to need to spend, I don't know, £20,000 in the next 20 years on maintaining those homes, and you've got your maintenance plan, so that's a fairly fixed cost. And also that those households are going to spend £20,000 over the next 20 years on their gas and electricity needs. The idea is, rather than you paying a contractor for all that maintenance and your tenants paying their energy provider for all of that energy, you can take all that money together, and that's going to need some borrowing at some point. And I think a lot of the times in the Netherlands it is actually the housing association that borrows. But yeah, and then you can contract one contractor, so one company, to deliver all of the whole retrofit to the house, and they then guarantee all the maintenance for that for the next 20 years or 30 years or 40 years or however long the contract is for. So the housing association doesn't have any maintenance costs anymore. And they also, that contractor gets a payment back from both the housing association, I think the tenant pays a housing association. So if they were paying on their bills £1,000 a year before, they might pay the housing association £1,000, or they might decide to reduce it to £600 or whatever it is. There's an agreed fee that the tenant will continue to pay the housing association for their kind of comfort plan or energy plan or whatever they decide to call it. And that money partially goes back for paying off the loan that was taken to put all that work in, and it partially goes to kind of paying that company that you've contracted for some of that ongoing maintenance work. But the idea is, this was all money that you were going to spend anyway, either through maintenance or energy bills, and instead by borrowing a bit of money and investing up front, you can instead spend that money making the home warmer, more comfortable, more environmentally friendly, and all of that sort of thing. Does that make some sense?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you, Justin. Yeah.
All right.
That's the end of the energy sprung one. So these are just kind of short summaries really that I've combined from doing a bit of research. But if there's one that needs a bit more explanation, then maybe that's someone that we could invite in for an expert witness session. The third case study for this comes from Ghent. So a little summary of something I learned when I was at the study visit for the other group a couple of weeks ago. And this is from Danpa Renovations. So this is a very particular targeted financing route for people who are living in low quality homes, but ones where they own the home, so they have some kind of capital that they could invest again, but they don't necessarily have any upfront cash available to them. So the municipality decided to create a loan of £30,000 originally per unit. So for 10 households, £300,000 in total, and just focus on 10 homes and how this could be a way of supporting them to develop their homes and deal with some low quality building issues, fire regulation, damp problems, as well as energy efficiency in one go. But instead of this being a kind of traditional, you pay a small amount of money back from the 30,000 or however much it is that you've borrowed over 10 years, 12 years, or whatever payback period. Instead with this one, it's locked into the point when you sell your house. So at the point you sell your house, you then have to pay back the amount of money that went into developing the house in the first place. At a rate that's slightly above the interest rate for the market. And then that money, once it gets paid back, goes back into a revolving fund. So it's a fairly new scheme. I think they started doing this about 2 years ago, but it's been fairly successful. Oh, and the diagram just shows how the kind of finance moves through with the home. So you've got the green block shows the initial value of the home. The yellow block is the part that's loan financed, and the rest of it is subsidies that is provided by the Ghent government. So the 2015 one is what happens once the retrofit works has been done. And then the final one shows what happens when you sell off the house. So you can see the assumption here is that the home becomes worth more money after the energy efficiency works is done and some time has passed, and that's kind of integral to the model for this one working. So they had some good results with this too. They found that a lot of the issues around the low quality buildings were fixed by going through this. It improved the living quality of the people living in the buildings, some improvements in the energy performance, and a 47% CO2 emissions reduction seen through the works too, with a variety of social benefits, which I thought were really interesting because they chose a small area to work with and kind of had those people working together in going through the process of the retrofit. So some of the challenges around this one, so there's the part about homes will become worth more money over time, and whether that is true or not, and what might be some of the problems of assuming a kind of loan pot based on that could be difficult. And of course, this is quite limited to people who own a home already of some kind. So those that are in rented accommodation, it would be more challenging for. For the future of this particular scheme, so the Ghent government are planning on scaling up this process and integrating it into their one-stop shop in Ghent. So they provide energy advice, subsidies, loans, and project management support within this one-stop shop within the centre of Ghent. They commented that they found that for each building and each individual, it required quite a kind of personalised approach, and that the idea of a kind of scalable retrofit approach is not something that's really worked for those, which I thought was quite interesting. And I've also included a bit of detail about how many people are involved in that organisation. So that's slightly going away from financing, but I thought you'd be interested to hear a little bit more about the way that this financing mechanism is going to be integrated into Ghent's wider kind of retrofit work and support. Moving on to Scotland now, for a slight variation on the Danport example that I gave. So I mentioned before that there was a challenge around the increase of the home with the previous example, whereby it assumed that the house become more expensive and therefore the loans could be paid back through that mechanism. So in Scotland, they have they found a kind of way around that. So this is a similar kind of scheme whereby the homeowner will not pay back the amount from the retrofit until the home is sold in the future. But in this case, the Scottish Government takes an equity share of the property's sale price. So if your home is worth 100,000 and you take out a retrofit loan for 10,000, then the government owns 10% in the equity of your home. And it's either you pay back 10% of the equity when you sell the house, or if this is a lower amount, then a commercial loan at 2.5% APR. So it means that people don't have a little bit more assurance in terms of what their home will be worth and how that will be financed, and you don't end up with a huge bill that you can't afford if your house hasn't increased in price over time. A little bit of extra information on this one. So with this, you as a householder, you apply to the Scottish Government, and the support is provided by the Energy Saving Trust. So the Energy Saving Trust is a charity and social enterprise based originally in the UK, but I think they have a much larger role in Scotland now in developing and delivering some of these new programs. One of the challenges with this model is that the householder is responsible for engaging with their mortgage provider. So there's a disconnect between the incentive and the loan pot and the mortgage aspect, which the householder coordinates, I think with some support from the Energy Saving Trust. And they do also have a number of other financial area-based loans, grants and funding schemes that we could possibly have a look at together if that one was of particular interest to people. And then I think this is my final lending example that I came up with. So this one is all the way from Toronto Help Scheme. And in this case, the city makes loans available of around up to £75,000 for energy saving. But in this case, the repayment of the loan comes through your property tax bill. So in this case, it's the municipality who is the loan pot holder, and through an already agreed tax mechanism, the amount of money that you owe for energy efficiency works is paid back through that mechanism instead. When the homeowner leaves the house, the loan will stay with the house, and the next person who purchases it will be the one that then becomes responsible for servicing the loan. And they have a variety of other incentives involved within their programs, which you can see in the picture of a rebate scheme, different kind of insulation measures, boiler incentives that are all kind of integrated together into this, but the majority of their financing work support comes through this help mechanism. The other thing that came out in my research so far has been the Innovate programme, which is an Energy Cities Horizon 2020 programme, where they've been working directly with a number of municipalities to look at how you develop a one-stop shop with a financing mechanism integrated into it. And there's a real variety of different ones that are involved in that. So there are some, so in Brussels, they've developed a green loans, which includes both short-term loan finance and long-term mortgage finance. In Aradipu, they worked with the National Bank to develop bespoke finance mechanisms for people going to the one-stop shop. In Riga, a 50% grant and 50% payback. So one of the ideas that I'd had for an expert witness session is inviting someone who has been involved in that program at the top level to present on some of the findings of this and how it's worked from a lending perspective, as all of them seem to work on a kind of, the majority of it, on some kind of lending to householders in order to finance the work. And the only other example I just made a little note of at the bottom is sometimes there have been green mortgages provided where energy efficiency is given as an extra amount of money on top of your usual mortgage in order to finance retrofit, and that is paid back over time as well. Okay, so that's all of the lending examples that I've gone through so far. There's an awful lot of them, and they've all got lots of different mechanisms and different aspects to them. So I've tried to include some that show the kind of breadth of the more innovative side of things, but I'm sure you guys will have extra things that you could offer or suggest that we might want to look into as well. So this is just to get thoughts going, really. I wanted to share one example from the energy bill side of things too, which is kind of similar to the lending aspect. So someone has a pot of money somewhere that a homeowner is gradually paying back to. But in this case, it's done through the energy bill. So this example comes from Fort Collins, which is in Colorado in America. And in this case, they have a local government utility company, which has been taking the lead on an awful lot of different retrofit work within the local area. So they have this program called Epic Homes, where it's a fully integrated model where everything comes through the utility company, everything from the assessment being managed by the utility all the way through to a certification scheme at the end. And it's similar to the other lending schemes. There is a certain interest rate, usually below market rate. There is a limit to the amount that you can borrow, a list of works which you can opt to have done with an energy expert who will guide you through the works. And this is all kind of integrated together. But the major difference here, which makes it a lot simpler from the consumer perspective, is that it's one bill. So the amount that you save and you pay off towards your retrofit costs is all integrated into one bill. So you can see the direct savings between them. And it's one company that is looking at monitoring that impact. So it's a lot clearer and a lot slicker example. I know that most of you don't have an energy company that is within your municipal control, but I know that for Boyan, that is something that is an option. So I wanted to include this example in case it's useful for you, but also if there is some interest from others in learning a little bit more about this one. Yeah, I've just said. Okay, so a little summary of some of the factors that I've sort of drawn out from looking at each of these different examples is that the interest rate matters. There were some examples where, say in the UK, where interest loans for retrofit have been set above the market level, and that hasn't proved particularly popular. And there's been some interesting examples where you can use the interest rate depending on people's income levels to make it more accessible for people from different financial brackets. So in the Belgian example, it was anything from 0% for those with the lowest income and wealth up to 2% for higher earners. The payback time and when it is paid back is really relevant. So for anything from a kind of regular payment back to a loan pot through to payment at the point of a house sale, can really change the options available to people and who will find it accessible to retrofit their homes. whether or not you link finance to performance of the building. So by providing the finance, using that as an incentive to encourage a deeper retrofit is an option, through to deciding not to do that. The requirements of the funder, of course, can influence that. So there's a kind of relationship between what's the approach of the funder versus what you can expect from the retrofit outcomes. There's a question around who's responsible for the energy performance and where the liability for that sits. So in some cases, and this is all linked through to the financing mechanism, as of course the amount of savings that a householder makes will rely on the performance of the building. So in some cases, the householder takes all the risk and they find the finance and they say, in the future, this means I'm going to be saving this amount on my bills. Where was I? So you're going to be saving this much on your bills, but if the house doesn't perform in that way and you don't save that energy, then that could cause trouble for you. Through to ones like energy sprung, where that liability is a bit more mixed in terms of whether it fits with the contractor or whether it fits with the individual as well, and sort of working through that relationship. There's a question of who manages the repayment loan. So sometimes it's been the municipality, sometimes it's been a private organisation. There's a question about how it's billed. So in some cases, you'll have one bill that pays for the retrofit money as a kind of extra finance, and in some cases, it will be integrated into your energy bill. And then there is some complexity to this in thinking through the renter and landlord relationship. So in this, the incentives for retrofit are a lot more complicated, whereby the person who is likely to invest in the property won't be the person who experiences the benefits of comfort. And maybe there are some ways of working around that in terms of integrating energy bills into your into the rent that you charge, but then there are some social implications of that, of how much rent should be charged on an individual too. So those are some of the key factors that I've drawn out from looking at these different case studies, and ones that I'd recommend really thinking about when you're developing your finance mechanism. Okay, so that's a bit of a, how am I doing on time? So yeah, we're okay. So yeah, that's a very whistle-stop summary of some different case studies on lending and using energy bills as ways of repayments for householders for finance. So has anyone got any questions about any of those before we go into a bit of a discussion?
I don't know which one was exactly, but in one of them, I don't know, the municipality or no, a regional government put the money to do the refurbishment, and it was received back after selling the household or the house or the flat. Yeah.
This
and no, the previous one. No, I think it was German.
KFW.
Yes, this one. No, continue. No, this one. Ghent.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So here, for each house is given maximum 30,000 euros, and the estimated population is 120,000 people. So, and is given the money and how they can afford that amount of money.
Yeah. So the in Belgium they have relatively high taxes and a large amount of that is really passed on to the local governments. So it's financed that way at the moment as a kind of national government decision with local government support. They have some really, really big programs in Ghent, which are really exciting, but it's because of that funding that's provided at the national level to begin with, and is kind of done on preferable terms. I guess because the national government can borrow at a much cheaper rate than you could as a private citizen, and it's a political choice to do so.
Yeah, I don't know if maybe it's possible that the regional government gives to the people that do the refurbishment 30,000 euros. I understand that is correct. And maybe the regional government ask for a loan or something like that to afford all that money, because they know that amount of money is in some years will be returned to the government, but they don't know when. So how it's sorry, to simplify, they have all the money to do, or maybe they ask for a loan and to another instance and they pay with that, or I don't know. Do you understand my question, or?
Not really, no.
I think I do. I've got a useful example for this, actually, because around where we are in Plymouth, there's a loan scheme for home improvements, which it's money from local authorities is given to a charity, a not-for-profit lender, and they lend it out to households at a 4% interest rate. And this isn't only for energy. This might be if somebody's got a roof that needs replacing, or any work that they need on their home. If they're on a low income, then they can borrow at 4% interest rate and then pay it back in their own time. They're given quite a lot of flexibility about how to pay that back. And in some cases, it does just stay as a mortgage on the house. And when they move house or die, then the money gets reclaimed that way. So in some ways, it's got some similarities to these schemes. And most of the local authorities around where we are originally paid into that scheme because it was coming towards the end of a year and they'd had a particularly high amount of grant to do kind of housing improvement works that year, and they were facing, if they didn't find a way to spend that money, they'd have to return it to national government, which I'm sure is familiar in most countries, that, as a local, as a municipality, you have a certain amount of time to spend that money, and if you don't spend it, then it gets reclaimed by national government and you don't see it anymore. So a lot of them began that scheme because they had this large amount of money left in their budget, and they thought, well, if we put it into this scheme, it gets it out of our bank account and into another organisation's bank account, so we can tell central government that it's been spent, but then it can be used to reinvest year on year. Now, Plymouth didn't do that at the time, but we're now looking at trying to offer the same loan, but focused just on energy. And I think the finances for that, for the kind of business model for that, was that if we can borrow £500,000, so borrow as a local authority £500,000 at roughly a 2.3% interest rate, I think is about the rate that we'd be looking at. We can then put this money across to this charity that oversees the lending out, and they will charge 4% interest rate on any loans given for people for energy efficiency works. And some of the difference between the 2.3%, so then they will have to pay the local authority back at 2.3% interest. So the local authority has obviously borrowed this money, but they're getting paid back the interest rate. So it doesn't cost the local authority anything to borrow that money. They're getting paid back what they're having to pay for having borrowed it, if that makes sense. so it's cost neutral to the council. The company that are overseeing the loans, then they get paid in two different ways. One, they've got the difference between the rate they're lending it out at, 4% and 2.3%. So there's obviously a difference in those interest rates, and so that money goes towards their costs. And then they're also going to get a bit of a top up from the council. And I think once it's all up and running at, you know, they're constantly lending out all the money. I think it costs about £7,000 or £8,000 per year for the council for all of their services. So it's not very much money, basically. It's a very small amount of money for their work. You know, the only cost to the council of this, really, if you look at the fact that the borrowing's being paid back, there's a bit of risk in there. But in terms of if this model works well, the only cost to the council is that retainer fee every year for the company that are overseeing all the loans, which is about £7,000 or £8,000. And the idea with that system, or the assumptions we've made for that, is that on average, households will borrow £5,000 a year, and they will pay that back quickly enough that every year there'll be about £1,000 that will be reinvested, if you like. So the paybacks that we're getting from all the houses that have borrowed that, we can then loan out again after that. So every year, households in Plymouth will borrow about £100,000 worth in order to do their projects. So I think you were asking about, is this money that the local authority has and can invest because it's in their budget already, or is this money that they're borrowing?
Yeah.
And I think there's two examples there. There's one example of local authorities that did have the money and could do it, but we've tried to work through a model where the local authority doesn't have the money and has to borrow it.
Yeah.
In which case we did still need to offer a bit of money, but it wasn't very much. But that is quite a high interest rate. 4% interest rate is going to put some, you know, it's not going to be for everybody in Plymouth. Some people will be able to borrow for less than that.
Okay, thank you.
So has anyone got any other questions about any of these case studies? If not, Justin kind of just led us on to the next bit in thinking through whether any of these could be useful for you in your local context. Can you imagine using these to encourage retrofit? Who might be the organisations that you would work with, and what kind of role may you take on? So Justin, am I right in thinking is that's what you're currently working through as an idea for financing retrofit, or are there some other ideas that you have as well?
Yeah, that's one we're currently working through because the council declared climate emergency, you know, well, early this year. They're currently working together a plan for how we'd respond to that. I haven't seen what the plan is around that for about 6 months now. So that was last time I saw it. That what I've just described is what we were proposing. I don't know how that's changed as they've worked through the ideas and things. So it might be quite different now. I also think I'm really interested in this model about like the HEAP model in Scotland, where a local authority who's able to borrow for a kind of lower amount can help those households who have got really poor quality housing, because I think some of those loan models work very well for households with good quality housing or who've got money and can pay back a loan. Even if they don't have money in the bank, they can pay back a loan quite comfortably. But we have a lot of houses in Plymouth where they're almost falling down. You know, they're in a very, very bad state of repair. And it's maybe not so good for energy efficiency reasons, because it probably won't make much difference. But in terms of that household's health and the condition they're in, I think those households end up spending a lot of money as a local authority on them when we're talking about caring for them and making sure that there's good provision of care for them. We'll spend a lot of money if their household does fall down. And it causes a danger, or that becomes a dangerous structure. We might end up spending a lot of money, and we spend a lot of money with these people going into hospital because their home's in such bad condition. And I think there's something interesting there about an offer which it's not going to cost the local authority anything, because what you're doing is saying, we'll take some equity in your house, or we'll charge you a very low interest rate loan. But from doing that, we will manage a whole load of works to make your house, you know, livable in and warm and comfortable, and, you know, meeting your needs so that you can continue to live in there in a healthy way. I think that's a really interesting thing in there, and I don't know how to finance it, but it's been useful to see some of these projects that kind of show that a little bit.
Does the equity release schemes appeal to anybody else? Can they see that being useful?
Well, I cannot say. Maybe some points from that scheme can be useful, but from every scheme, I think that you have really gathered some nice examples all around, and even though I was in my responsibility to prepare for the future energy efficiency program, I have I don't know, met some similar I don't know, examples. Every municipality seems to have some points that are specific for that one municipality, and even though there are some similarities between examples that you have presented, every one of them is a specific one, and I believe that our final product will have some I don't know, elements from various examples that you have presented here. Yeah, so if Justin feels that Scottish example is something that he wants to learn more about, it's fine with me. I mean, I would agree with any other example if to have to learn more about.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So Scottish Heat's one seems popular so far and might be quite useful because they have a number of different loan schemes and the equity release and all sorts of different elements that someone could present on. Elena, how about for you in your context where you'll be 50% grant funded but 50% loan pot, or 50% provided by the individual? Do you think any of this could support
Yes,
that
it's
aspect?
upcoming. Yes, I told you several times that this is upcoming. The next stage of the program, 40% will be co-financed with the stakeholders, with the citizens. I like very much all these case studies, especially Energy Sprung. I know this initiative, but it's not applicable for our case in Bulgaria. It's it's for the rich country, if I can say directly. We can't compare Bulgaria with Germany, with Denmark, with, you know, we are the poorest in the EU. So we use the European programs, European fundings now as grants, but next steps is with co-financing from the national level or from the people in the case with the private houses. Okay, so if somebody is not able to pay by his own, maybe they will use loans, bank loans.
Yeah, are there any parts from this that you think you could work with the bank in order to develop a finance loan scheme that would make it easier for people or of different backgrounds to be able to...
This will be at national level. This is not under our responsibility. So for me, this topic is not applicable really.
Okay.
For the banking and so etc.
Okay.
The technicians. So.
Okay. Cool. All right. Great. So. So I have one other element to present on, which is the fourth and final way that you could financially encourage more retrofit work, which is tax and regulations. So this is a slightly shorter section with less detail. And it's just a summary of some of the conversations that have been happening around Europe of different ways of kind of using taxes to incentivize different parts of retrofit. So there's been some discussion about whether it would be possible to link property taxes. So these are the regular, monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever charges that municipalities take on people who own homes or live in homes, and linking that to the energy performance of the house. So if you have some retrofit works done and your energy performance improves, then you get some kind of tax cut on your property tax. And it's kind of a useful way to think about it from a municipal level, as it's one that the mechanism for recharging is already established. There's a similar idea about taxes that are at the point of sale of the house. So in the UK, that's called the stamp duty. I did have a look at each of your different contexts, and from what I understand, there is some kind of property tax and some kind of tax which is taken at the point when you sell the house. And you could link that as well to energy performance. So there's an example here from Berkeley where they established a number of different triggers for energy efficiency, that at the point that you sell your house, the new person who purchases it is responsible for doing some relatively basic measures on improving the energy efficiency. But all the same, it had some improvements in the local area. So 712 out of 30,000 buildings have been improved through this mechanism there. So it's using tax mechanisms that already exist in order to encourage a bit more work around energy efficiency. Quite similar to the example that Ika shared with us. So instead of it being about at the point of property tax or when the house is sold, when someone is going to do renovation works, then you put requirements when somebody comes to the planning department and says they want to improve their home, you put some energy efficiency requirements into that work and you regulate it that way. There's also examples of tax credits being used. So in France, they have something called the Energy Transition Tax Credit, which allows you to deduct a certain amount from your income tax for work that you're doing on energy efficiency. It's capped at about €8,000 per person, 16,000 for a couple, and they've been investing in that for about 4 to 5 years. So it's a national government policy with a large loan pot, but it is reimbursed through income tax. There's also been some discussion about using VAT as a tax lever for encouraging people to purchase energy efficiency measures. So that could be anything that runs through the building trade. So that could be insulation works, and anything that would be used as part of a energy efficiency work on a household. It's already in place for some energy efficiency goods, but it would require EU changes in VAT law, which is currently regulated at that level at the moment. But all the same, it seems to be being discussed a little bit at the moment in policy circles. And then finally, there was this talk of an energy efficiency feed-in tariff, which is a kind of subsidy for every kilowatt hour of energy that you save. So this is something that's been talked about in the UK at the moment. Again, it would require national level agreement or policy being put in place, but it's a slightly more complicated mechanism, as you need to have a really clear way of measuring the savings and figuring out how to fund that as well. I think that's, all of the different tax and regulation ideas that I've found at the moment. From some of the assessments of these different models, what I would say is that they usually incentivize more single measures to be done on homes, as there's less kind of work on what's the specifics of the energy efficiency standard that you're working towards, and generally are sort of more about leveling up as opposed to achieving a really high quality performance. So this kind of tax and regulations work seems to be something that could be used as part of a wider suite of financial mechanisms or triggers to send signals to market and to encourage people to start thinking about retrofit. But in terms of thinking about the quality assurance side of things, they haven't seemed to have achieved the kind of like big carbon savings that would be required by EU law at the moment. But still, I think there's some quite interesting things that could be used, and maybe there's a